think that this is one of the ways I can identify who's good at at their job. If they love babbling about something that they're very passionate about, that means that they have taken in the time to really know their topic, to really know what's happening. And I mean, for sure, babble away today for another 25 to 30 minutes. But okay, so I've started the recording, and we couldn't do a live for this, so this is like a recorded version for the live, because some of our clients are Middle Eastern, the South Asian region. So we have Mission ELIXIR essentially is a social cause. It advocates for mental health awareness. And, of course, if you're struggling through anything hard, if you're struggling through anything that you need a professional's help with, feel free to get in touch. We have Hindi, English, Arabic speaking, French speaking therapists and counselors and psychologists, so feel free to reach out. I really do think there's nothing, it's never too late to better yourself, with 2024 and the new year beginning and new year resolutions and all that. So having said that, today we have Jahanara with us. She's a wonderful new, I actually don't know her, so this is my first time talking to her as well. And as it's the first time for our followers at least to have listened to her area of expertise and what she's worked with. So she's a Fulbright scholar, which is wonderful as it is, and I think you studied from Rochester, yes?
Yes.
Masters in counseling. And so she's also worked with a lot of domestically adults who've been through domestically violent households and backgrounds. And so we're going to talk more on that. The topic for today is also the impacts on a person's psyche, on an individual psyche, when you've been through a drastically a drastic and domestically violent background, how that impacts your psyche. I myself, I've worked with a lot of clients who've had a sexual trauma past. So actually, interestingly enough, I do believe that theoretically what you learn is almost the same for everyone, but then in practice, what you learn and what you get better at, what kind of skill sets you develop, it is different for everyone. So I do suggest, anyone who comes to me, I do suggest them that go to somebody who is a specialist in your area of the problematic area that you are facing, where it could be mood disorder, it could be a learning disability that you're struggling with, and then maybe you have certain mood disorders that are accompanying that. A lot of my ADHD clients, for instance, also suffer from depression. So it's very important to go to the right person for your specific needs. And so we have Jahanara. I'm here to learn as well. I was just saying this earlier. I haven't worked with a lot of clients who've had a DV past, so I'd love to learn more about this with you as well. We're gonna talk about first. I would, of course, Jahanara, feel free to give a brief introduction for yourself, and I do believe that you are the best person to introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and why you do what you do. But also tell us a little bit about what is domestic violence, how can it be characterized, because we do have a lot of people who do look up internet and then do apply a lot of things to themselves. So if we were to categorically, academically, research-based identify what is domestic violence and what kind of repercussions it may have on a person. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Jahanara, like Khaula very nicely and wonderfully introduced. I did my Master's of Mental Health Counseling from the University of Rochester. And over there, a lot of my work in my practicum and internship was at a domestic violence agency. So I just exclusively worked with, I think, hundreds of survivors at the agency. I was part of the counseling department. And then about 2.5 years ago, I finished my program. I came back to Pakistan. So I've been in private practice since then. And over here, I've been receiving, I think, a lot of clients who are living in DV households. So either they're the kids of that house, the adult kids, like in Pakistan and Desi communities, you live with your parents till you're much older. Or they are people who are directly being impacted by the violence, right? And I think the more clients I got, the more I realized just how common it was in our region. And something interesting that you said, So that's my introduction. Um, I want to get into something interesting you said, which was, people kind of Googling things and then diagnosing things, or self-diagnosing. It's the absolute opposite with DV, because people will Google it and they will say, no, that's not me, or that's not my relationship.
Oh, I didn't I didn't think of that. I didn't know that that was the stat to, because generally a lot within the field of mental health, a lot of people do go online and then do diagnose themselves. But in DV, they tend to deny.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's like a whole stage of counseling work is your client comes in and they're describing these things. And when you say, wait a second, that sounds violent, or wait a second, that sounds abusive, it takes a while for them to, let's say, absorb that message, because that's a lot to take in, to say that my loved one is violent or this is abusive. There's so much that's Khala, normalized in our community. And well, this happens with everyone's dad or everyone's husband, or this is normal. If we talk about financial abuse, even physical abuse, I think the word domestic violence is kind of, it leads to a different place, because whenever people think about it, they think that there's supposed to be some hitting, crying, screaming. And whenever they think about domestic violence, they're always thinking about physical violence, right? But then when we look at it from a domestic violence counseling lens, there's so many aspects to it. There's financial abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's isolation, there's using children in custody courts, there's a whole big category of ways to torture and abuse someone. And for people who are listening, I would really recommend to Google the power and control wheel, if you're listening, if you're watching this, to really look that up, because it has all these different categories. It's like a little pizza pie chart. And you can look at those categories, and sometimes people are looking at them and they're like, oh, yeah, well, this fits. uh, that's really weird. So yeah, domestic violence is a lot more than just violence. It's emotional violence, it's psychological violence, it's many, many things. Isolation is something I want to speak for a minute about, because I think a lot of people don't know about isolation. It's an abusive tactic where a person will say, I don't like your friends too much, or I don't like your family. So after getting married or after getting in a relationship, there's a lot of isolation that starts happening, where the first thing we target in a counseling treatment plan is, what are your social resources? Who do you know? Who knows about this? Who are your friends? Is there a neighbor who knows that you live with a violent person? Is there a coffee shop person who what's your community? Because many times, Khala, these people are coming in and there's like, oh no, I don't have a community. No, I didn't tell anyone because it's too embarrassing, or I didn't think it was a big deal, or I don't talk to my mom that often because, well, my partner said I don't like your mom. Isolation is one of those big ones that people have no idea about, and it's like over months the survivor gets more isolated and more dependent on the abusive party.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's a little bit about what domestic violence is, and it's really, really common in our region.
Actually, I was going to come to that, the isolation part of it as well, because I do believe that whether you're going through any kind of sexual trauma or physical trauma, the
Mhm.
stages of the symptomology, or the stages that a person goes through,
Mhm.
is kind of similar. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit. For instance, what kind of stages does the perpetrator take the victim or the survivor, whichever one you prefer, through? Like, what are those stages? Because I do believe that nobody goes into, whether it's the perpetrator or the victim, nobody goes into a relationship thinking they're going to abuse the other person, or they're going to be abused.
Mhm.
Nobody goes into that thinking that. Everybody goes into a relationship with high hopes, with that whole honeymoon time period phase, where they want to be happy, they want to give love, and they want to accept and receive love. So
Mhm.
what do you think happens over there? Like, why, first of all, I do understand that the perpetrator has to make a very green situation, a green field, to
Mhm.
abuse the other person, right? But
Mhm.
then, what are the different stages afterwards that the perpetrator takes the victim through to make them arrive at this very vulnerable position where they're unable to ask for help, where they deny the situation that they're in? And I, currently as well, I have clients who are going through different kinds of abuse. Ah, that's that beautiful girl you talked about.
Yeah.
It's all right. She's gonna enjoy this. It seems like she's enjoying the session as well. But so yeah, what are the different stages that the perpetrator takes the victim through to get them to a place where they do not seek any help? And um, at times they also victims also end up going back to the perpetrator because of the abuse. So what is that about? Maybe if you could, we could highlight. I know these are very intense and very in-depth conversations that
Yeah.
need to be had on this topic, but if you could just maybe shed a light on that, highlight it a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. I think it starts off very subtle.
Yeah.
Because whenever you're connecting with someone, and over here, I'd like to mention the cycle of abuse, another thing that listeners and viewers can kind of Google and search up, okay, cycle of violence, cycle of abuse. It's going to be really helpful. Is that it never starts out, nobody wants to be married to someone who is being abusive to them or be in a relationship with someone. So I think some of the, when there used to be this group I used to run for psychoeducation for survivors, and we talk about red flags. Okay, so what's going on? What are red flags? Because all these things, Khala, of financial abuse, they start much later when you're in it, when you're committed. They don't start right off the bat. So one of the initial red flags is there's a lot of like, you're my everything, and I might die without you. There's an extreme connection, extreme, almost like I'm gonna be a rug, like walk all over me, you're everything. So there's so much power that they're giving the survivor, right? And there's such a complicated topic, and I could speak so much about it, but people who are survivors or who are more vulnerable to be survivors are also people who've grown up in a DV home, or they're also coming from places where they don't know what emotional security looks like. So they become a more vulnerable population. And when someone with abusive tendencies comes in and they're like, my house is yours, I can't live without you, you're everything, I love your taste in this, it's a little bit of a, like if you were walking in a desert and someone gave you a dirty glass of water, you'd have that dirty glass of water because you've been desperate for something for so long. And sometimes people also settle for these relationships because it's one way to get out of the already toxic home that you're in. So it's like, okay, I'll do anything to get out of here. So this sounds like a great option.
Yeah.
So it's subtle. It's like a facade. It's an illusion of, I'm going to have your emotional needs met. I got you. And then when you're in it, it starts by small things like getting mad at someone because they went out with their friends and they didn't tell you. And it suddenly it's like, wait, what happened? Like, I just went out with my friends. It's gaslighting. I think you were asking, how does a person end up in a space where they're not seeking out help? They're confused. A lot of the people, when they're coming in and I do an intake, I'm asking them things. There's a lot of, so brain fog is very common with someone who's living in a volatile home.
Hmm.
Oh, I don't know what was
What,
yesterday, what day was.
what was that? Brain fog would be forgetting things, the time and spatial aspect in your brain,
Yes.
yeah.
So yeah, so I'll mention it for the viewer. So brain fog is when you're very confused. Maybe there's some memory gaps that are coming in. Maybe there are things that you're forgetting. So your cognitive, your memory, your capacity to decision making, those things are kind of affected. Like I came back. I remember I put the car keys on the key holder. Now I forget. Now I'm forgetting, where did I put the car keys? There's very small things. And dissociation, which maybe if, listeners are familiar with, is feeling disconnected from your environment. So you're talking to the therapist, or you're talking to your children, or you're having food, but at the same time you feel like you're not present in the room. Dissociation is so common. Brain fogging is so common. People living with volatile
Do
homes.
people, sorry to cut you, do people feel dissociation and desensitization in the same way if they've come from a DV home?
Absolutely. Dissociation is that, like desensitized thing where the nervous system is like, I can't take it anymore. So it's like it's clocking out, it's going offline, really.
Hmm.
And there are many things that, like I spoke about earlier, like denial is a big part of it. Is they're very hard truths for me to accept. Or if I accept them, then what does that mean?
Hmm.
I don't have any help. So there's a lot of confusion around what is this behavior and how do I navigate it? What are resources? So that's what keeps them stuck. There's people who are telling me that someone beats them up, and yet they're like, no, but is it domestic violence? you know, it's so much.
There's also a survivor complex as well in especially within South Asian society. We have Indians and Pakistanis, both of them listening to us right now probably, and The thing is that South Asian households have the girls do generally tend to think that, at the end of the day, this is a loving relationship. He does take care of some of my needs, and only if I can fix him. So because generally women are taught in our households, when as they grow older, that, okay, you're supposed to be the one who's going to keep the house going, and make it and break it situation, hey, stuff like that. So I do believe that we do have more pressure when it comes to making a house work, making a relationship work. And we have this idea in our heads that we are the ones to save our better halves. And that leads us again into because when you start off a relationship and you're already in a vulnerable position, and your partner betrays your trust, and puts you in a rather much more vulnerable position, where do you go from there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Khala, a lot of the times and we're talking about survivor vulnerability. So if you're more vulnerable to being a survivor, ending up in these relationships, that's a wonderful, beautiful point that you brought up, is that we're taught that we can fix. We're taught that we can, um, cure someone with giving them greater love or support. And the thing with that is that it misses psychoeducation, because that's what survivors are already doing. When their partner is getting angry, they're trying their hardest to placate them. They're saying, oh, maybe if I do this a certain way, they won't get mad. Maybe if I dress differently, maybe if I don't meet my mom, they'll have less anger outbursts. They're already doing all of that. And when people come in, they're like, tell me how to make him less angry. And I'm like, interesting, we'll have to change that goal somewhere down the line. Because initially that's what they want to do. Like, how do I keep this marriage, or how do I keep this thing working on, like moving on, or how do I make this work? There is no conception of this is wrong, and I have a choice now as an adult to leave this. Of course, there are very realistic restraints to that as well. But yeah, these are psychological reasons that keep us trapped. We're like, no, just if I try differently, just if I did something differently, this person's reaction would be different, which is like a false sense of control we have, because we think that their reaction is because of us. But their reaction, abusive reaction, is because of their pathology. It's
Yeah.
not because of something you're wearing or doing or not doing. So that's where that mismatch comes in, where I have a false sense of control, where I feel like, oh, if I wore something more attractive, or if I spoke to him or her differently, he wouldn't have had to. That false sense of control keeps you really stuck for years.
Feeling, in fact. Okay, so let's quickly go on to, if somebody's facing all of these challenges, how do they bring themselves to the point where they recognize this abuse, and what do they do, as in, like, how do they deal with that kind of abuse? Like, how do they find their way? Because it's as for instance, it's very important to understand that at the end of the day, in the therapeutic goal, general overall goal, is to understand that at the end of the day, you are in your own control. Nobody's actions and the other person's problems and whatnot, they're not in your control. I think a lot of therapists and counselors and psychiatrists do work with their clients just on this very ideal, that at the end of the day, whatever changes that you are expecting to make when you do come into counseling, is that in your own life, pertaining to you, in your own circle of influence. And so it's very, how do clients who've had a domestic violence past, how do they come in and how do you help them come to this realization that at the end of the day, uh, how they're reacting to you is a consequence of their own pathology, and that is something they need to fix, and that is not your job to fix. And yeah, just if you could come talk about a little bit about how do you treat these clients, or for instance, what can we do about it? If somebody is not yet in therapy right now, maybe somebody's listening who's not even hasn't taken even that initial step, how do they try to wriggle out of it somehow? What would you recommend, actually? No.
I think one of the really important things is to see what need is being met when they connect to the abusive person. Because as long as there's a need that's being met, the connection will be there, right? So many times, like when we're doing deeper psychotherapy or deeper work, we want to go into a little bit of the past and a little bit of understanding what does connection and attachment look like for this person. Many times, Khala, what they're trying to do is they're trying to maybe find someone from their past, like from their childhood, an attachment figure or an abusive figure or a parent or a caregiver who they weren't able to fix. or who they weren't able to save. And now, when their partner, husband, or wife as well, abuser can be from all genders, is being abusive, psycho- they don't know that consciously, but psychologically, what they're doing is they're playing a game. They're saying, "Come abuse me, and then I'll try to save you. Come abuse me, I'll try to save you. And I'll try to undo my past in some way that I could never because I was maybe younger, smaller, powerless, things like that. This is my opportunity to fix you." So I think an important way to kind of just wriggle ourselves out of that is just to notice what gets fulfilled, what's their project, what's happening for them, right? And when we figure out the need, it will be really much easier to do that. The other day, I was working with someone and I told them, it's only going to get worse from here. And they're looking at me for a minute. They're like, what do you mean? It's very difficult. I wrote I think my final year thesis on different stages of change that a survivor is at. Because immediately, and I feel like so many therapists are undertrained with DV. When people come in, obviously our goal is we want to make the survivor safe, right? We want them to make healthier decisions, whether that means staying with the relationship in a different way or whether that means exiting. But survivors are not at that stage when we're receiving them. So there's all these different stages of change. Again, another thing people can Google is, you start by just being in denial or being unaware of the problem. Then you start by noticing, oh, wait, this is a problem. Then you start to plan about it. Then you take action. Then I think there's implementation. Then there's relapse, things like that. But there's a whole set of stages that I, as a DV counselor or as a therapist, I walk through clients and I try to assess what stage are they at. Because if I'm at a different stage than the client's at, we're not going to have alliance.
Hmm. Oh, interesting. Okay, lovely. All right. So this is essentially, I mean, also, how do they? What's the success rate of DV clients? Where when once they've gone through these stages and they recognize, oh, I've been isolated before and I'm unable to recognize my abuse, and now I really want to get out of it. There's also that stage where it's bargaining. Oh well, he does this and this and this, and I mean the abuse is there, but at least he feeds my kids, and at least my kids will have a roof on the. Very very South Asian problems, I would say, right? Because we do unfortunately tend to think about society and whatnot, and log kya kahenge, all of that stuff. Now, what's the success rate like within your practice and in your experience? How many women, and have you also had male clients, by the way, who've had DV? Okay, well, that's wonderful, that's wonderful.
Very few, though, very few. And even in the US, Hola, very few. Like, I think we would get 90%, maybe 99% of the calls were from female clients. And then maybe I think I worked with maybe two or three, maybe four over the course who were male clients. There's a lot of shame, and we could do a whole another live on Monday, part two. But there's a lot of shame, but yes, they are there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what's the statistics of improvement? Should DV, should people, wives, girlfriends who are in domestically violent relationships, should they have any hope? Is there an end to this this nightmare for them? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, there is. And I think the success rate is always, we have to look at it in terms of, people are not living in a vacuum. We're living in a society that's really unforgiving. I think there's such a difference in working in this field in Pakistan and working in the US in this field. Because in the US, we have an advocate, you've got a lawyer, you're getting them a social worker, they're at an agency, there's a proper place they can go. Over here, there's none of that, right? So I work in very difficult conditions where I have to do a lot of work to find them. Okay, can I advocate for my client, find them a lawyer, this and that. And honestly, at the end of the day, sometimes success means that they can't leave the relationship. But success for them sometimes is that I'm glad that I went to therapy. So, later on at the end of the day, I can know that this wasn't right. And I can know that there was this one person who told me that this wasn't right. There, we have to really take the system into consideration and know that sometimes, very realistically, this was really part of our DV training as well, that a lot of the people that you're working with will not be able to leave. So how do you as a counselor work with that? How do you continue to provide support and change your support over the years as well? So yeah, it's about resources. It's about, and anytime we speak about goals, we want to make it a word that's very commonly used in DV trainings, survivor centric. What does the survivor want? You know, what is the success for the survivor? Sometimes it's more education, sometimes it's more, you know, resources. So we have to see, you know, what is success for them, what did they come in with, and what, where are they now? But yeah, in terms of leaving it, yeah, people do leave, but also people don't leave. So we have to keep that very humanistically and realistically open, you know, when we're looking at cases. But yes, in terms of people looking for hope, when you get that right, you know, education and therapy is going to be a very difficult process. It's not going to be easy. It's going to feel nasty, and it's going to feel like, oh, what is my therapist saying? I thought my life was great. You know, I
Yeah.
thought everything was fine.
For
Um,
sure. I think right now mental health practice overall needs to be also culturally sensitive. It is so important to realize that we cannot replicate um, the models of mental health therapy that are taught to us. So I do think that it needs to be based on the what is survival centric at the end of the day. What does the client want at the end of the day? How are they most comfortable with the place that they are in? And it is again, I think it's a very hard part of being a therapist. I do feel that it is not up to me to drag the person out of the abuse that they are in. Maybe they're, it is not up to me. I cannot be on that high horse to tell them or think what is best for them. You've got to learn from them, regardless of what the situation is, regardless of what the disorder is, whatnot. You've got to learn from them, and you have to let them choose their path. And the best you can do is be a guide for them. And I tend to get a little bit passionate about this part because I do think that, the way an objective person looks at a situation is a lot clearer. And it's so muddy and murky and dirty when you're in that field, where you're being affected by so many things. It's difficult. And it's so difficult, but to be able to empathize with the person who's making those difficult choices, and when they're unable to make those difficult choices as well, to be able to empathize and be there with them. It's a hard part of this job, but it's totally worth it in the end. As you said, that there is hope. The people that do come to you do change. I also feel like we need to have more talks around what happens to men who've had bad experiences, and in this field of mental health. We need to make more noise when it comes to their rights, when it comes to what they go through. I feel like that, again, very tabooed and a very shame topic for men to talk about their mental health and to come towards therapy. So yeah. But thank you, Jahanara. This was lovely, truly very informative. I did learn a lot myself, and I'm sure and I'm hoping that anyone listening to you has learned or has at least, begun to think about it. That's the most that we can hope for. Thank you so much for your time. Guys, feel free to reach out to her if you feel like it. Feel free to, but I do recommend everyone, instead of, we talked about pop psychology in the very beginning. It is so important for you to please seek out professional help. Literally every live or every conversation I have, I do mention this. So important to go to a professional with your mental health needs. Pop psychology is only going to take you that far. So thank you so much, Jahanara. If you have anything else to please add, please do so.
Yeah, sure. I think I just want to kind of, I know we're ending, but when I think there was something you said about a survivor saying like, well, yeah, he provides for the family, or looking at the good parts. It's so important to validate that. And there was this workshop I was running. I don't know, a couple of months last year. I ran a workshop for therapists and for psychology students on understanding and working with DV in the therapy space. And we were kind of talking about like, okay, so what do? You can't get into a logic battle with the client. Will you say nay, but he is ganda, or this person is bad, and the other person will say no, 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 but he's really good. You have, the more, I think, especially as a therapist, if there's other counselors and therapists watching this, the more holistically you are able to understand their abuser or their abusive partner, you will build better alliance with them, because yes, they have those good parts, because that's what they got married to, or that's what they got connected to. And sometimes when a survivor is kind of recounting that, these are the good parts, it's a way for them to stay psychologically safe. Because if they constantly thought about the negative parts all the time, they'd be dissociated as heck at home and all the time. So, sometimes when they're for what maybe to the layman seems like excuses, or seems like, oh, we need to change this, it's psychological safety that's holding them together at that moment.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, Jahanara. I don't want to take too much of your time, but it was so lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
All right.
thanks.